Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, really? But there I was in my empty, quiet house, my laptop on the kitchen counter, and I typed in my name. Looking for a man between the ages of 40 to 60? Sure, why not?
Date My Age is different. With verified profiles, you can feel safe and secure to explore meaningful connections with interesting and mature singles.
Date My Age made it really easy. I could join and view online profiles for free. All of a sudden, my empty house wasn't so quiet anymore. I got so much attention, it just made me feel seen and alive. Date My Age helped me start a totally new chapter in my life.
Find a friend, a lover, a partner at Date My Age. Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
From the late 1960s to the early 1990s, the United States saw an unprecedented surge in serial killing, rooted not just in the dynamic changes of the post-war period, but in the development of the human psyche, going back many millennia to our ancient past. Wonder why serial killers exist, why they emerged, and why they exploded in the post-war United States? Check out The Golden Age of Murder, a panoramic look at serial killing, focusing on the United States in the post-war period, with your hosts, Toby and Simeon.
You're listening to The Murder in My Family, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including Missing Persons, DNA ID, Beyond Bizarre True Crime, Zodiac Speaking, and Scene of the Crime. All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Murder in My Family. I'm your host, Mike Morford. In this episode, we'll be discussing the case of a 19-year-old man who was gunned down in his Wisconsin townhome by masked intruders. Police have been left to wonder if the attack was random or if the killers were somehow connected to the victim. We'll dive into this case after some quick housekeeping. Independent podcasts like this one depend on word of mouth to bring in new listeners. So if you find that you enjoy this show, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast. And be sure to introduce a friend of the show and invite them to listen. With your help, The Murder in My Family can continue to grow and reach a new audience. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on social media. We're on Twitter with the handle @MurderInMyFam, or you can find us on Facebook by searching for The Murder in My Family. And you can also listen to the show for free on the Spreaker app, and even interact with me by commenting on episodes that I can read and respond to your comments. If you'd like to help support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated, and you can do so by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon may include early and ad-free episodes of the show, or bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include stickers, thank you cards, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/themurderinmyfamily. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. And thank you to all of the supporters that help keep the show growing and improving. One last note, please consider supporting any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsor support that this show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you. And now on with the show. Douglas McMillin, or Doug, was born on March 10, 1989 in Rockford, Illinois, to Robert McMillin and Paula Rudenauer. Robert died when Doug was young, and Paula eventually remarried to a man named Fred Schultz. Doug has a younger brother, James McMillin, and a younger sister, Molly Schultz. Eventually, the family moved to Wisconsin, and Doug attended and graduated from Green Bay Southwest High School. At the time of his death, he was a student at Northeast Wisconsin Technical College, which has a campus in Green Bay. Doug was an extremely creative and brilliant person who had a great sense of humor, and according to his friends, he was exceptionally generous and was unforgettable to anyone who met him. According to his brother, Doug was unforgettable in many ways, especially with his laugh and sense of humor. Doug expressed creative brilliance through his art, through his life approach, and his consistently unique perspective. His robust personality ensured that anyone who knew him had a story about him, and he enjoyed stirring pots, and there was never a dull moment in his presence. Doug was fun and deeply curious about how life worked on all levels. His friends recall his generosity and his penchant for good times, and they frequently reminisce on their experiences with Doug. As an adult, Doug moved out into a townhouse on Longview Avenue in southern Alloway, Wisconsin. He became a casual user of marijuana, and admittedly, he began to deal drugs out of his townhome. Being a young man recently out on his own and a college student, the money he could make was hard to pass up. And while Doug himself wasn't a gun-toting cartel type of dealer, the drugs he was involved in selling opened him up to the dangers and the dangerous people that came along with that lifestyle. And one day, those dangerous people would show up at Doug's door. Alloway is actually a village. A decade ago, the census showed less than 14,000 residents living there, and the number seems to have gone down since then. The village is smack dab in the middle of Brown County, near the northeastern edge of Wisconsin. With such a small population, there's only one officer assigned to regularly patrol around the village at any one time. That officer is stationed out of the Brown County Sheriff's Office in Green Bay, about a 7-minute drive north of Alloway. Although Alloway sounds like a small village in a nice Midwestern state, like pretty much every other corner of the U.S., it has its own share of problems, some of it related to drug activity. It was in Alloway that Doug's life would come to a violent end. At around 11 p.m. on March 8, 2009, 2 nights before Doug's 20th birthday, he had friends over as he usually did. Doug's place was a popular place to hang out. Without warning, multiple masked men barged into the townhome wielding guns. Some reports say there were 2 intruders, while others mentioned 3. The masked men demanded Doug and his friends to lay on the floor. They wanted whatever money and drugs were there, apparently. It's a situation that perhaps many of us have thought of. What would I do if someone pulled a gun on me? In Doug's line of work, he certainly must have considered that possibility. But none of us really know what we would do until we were in that situation. For Doug, he decided to fight back, and it was a decision that cost him his life. After they realized that they had lost control of the situation, at least one of the masked men opened fire with a handgun, and one of the shots hit Doug. The intruders then fled into the night, leaving Doug's friends alive. Officers responding to the townhouse found money, drug paraphernalia, and some drugs inside the home. Doug died on the floor from his gunshot. It's not clear exactly what his friends did immediately after he was shot. Did they panic that they were at the scene of a murder with drugs and cash laying around? Did they delay calling the police while they thought of the possibilities and the ramifications? If there was a delay, does that mean that early help could have saved Doug? When police did show up, it seems the witnesses were not overly anxious to share with them all the details. The use of a disguise by the killer seemed to point to the possibility that the men probably weren't strangers to Doug. They may have been so-called friends or even clients of Doug's that decided to double-cross him. Maybe they thought they would get in and get out without anyone getting hurt, but things didn't go according to plan. Sheriff Todd Delane told WeAreGreenBay.com that unfortunately, due to the drugs being involved, not fully disclosing everything and being untruthful about details was a setback right from the beginning. He felt that perhaps the witnesses knew more or weren't fully cooperative. Without any strong evidence or witnesses, police didn't have much to go on, and Doug's case has gone unsolved for 13 years now. Even a $5,000 reward put up by Doug's mother and stepfather has never been claimed. Last year, in May 2021, it was reported that the Brown County Sheriff's Office was taking a deep dive into Doug's murder, but still, nothing has come from it. The Brown County Sheriff's Department remains hopeful that they can make an arrest in Doug's murder. They have been able to charge a few individuals with various drug charges stemming from the investigation into Doug's murder, but no one has been named as Doug's killer yet. Police told WeAreGreenBay.com, "When these sort of violent crimes occur, we are going to work them until we solve them, and we are never going to stop working them until they are resolved. We will never give up on his case." Doug may not have lived the all-American small-town life that many of us picture when we think of small towns in Wisconsin. He was young and at an age when he was still figuring out who he was and what he wanted to become. And sadly, he never got a chance to figure that out. Doug's violent murder has devastated his family. They want and deserve answers. If you have information about the murder of Doug McMillin, you can anonymously call Crime Stoppers at 920-432-7867. You can also call Sergeant Holzback with the Brown County Sheriff's Office directly at 920-448-6187. The Sheriff's Department has been very clear that they don't care about the drug usage from over a decade ago. They just want to get justice for Doug and his family. So if you're out there listening and you have any information, however small, please reach out to investigators. Doug's younger brother, James, looked up to him. He was the cool, wild older brother that many of us have, or always wanted. He's missed out on a life together with Doug. James hopes that people will come forward now with the passage of time who perhaps wouldn't talk early on, and he hopes to get into contact with people who might have answers, and that perhaps this podcast episode may help facilitate that. James sat down with me to discuss his brother's short life and his violent death, as well as his family's search for justice. That conversation is coming up in just a moment.
Offer valid on standard browsers, U.S. only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, really? But there I was in my empty, quiet house, my laptop on the kitchen counter, and I typed in my name. Looking for a man between the ages of 40 to 60? Sure, why not?
Date My Age is different. With verified profiles, you can feel safe and secure to explore meaningful connections with interesting and mature singles.
Date My Age made it really easy. I could join and view online profiles for free. All of a sudden, my empty house wasn't so quiet anymore. I got so much attention, it just made me feel seen and alive. Date My Age helped me start a totally new chapter in my life.
Find a friend, a lover, a partner at Date My Age. Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
This season on DNA ID, a couple shot at a campground, a realtor waylaid at a home showing, a bookstore owner stabbed among her volumes, a young soldier dumped in a parking lot. What do all these tragic cases have in common? They are all cold cases solved after decades of frustration and futility by forensic genealogy. I'm Jess Betancourt, and in Season 2 of DNA ID, I'll bring you 24 more fascinating cases in which the killer eluded generations of investigators until science and some crafty genealogists cracked them at long last. Listen to DNA ID on your favorite podcast platform. New episodes drop every other Monday.
Hi, James, and thank you for coming on The Murder of My Family to discuss your brother Doug's case with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Mike. I appreciate you, hosting this kind of podcast and, being able to kind of offer these, unique perspectives of people involved. So, glad to be here.
Well, it's my honor to do that and to give a side of these cases where, it's outside the news. People get to hear firsthand a little bit from people connected to these cases that we see in the news and, a different viewpoint. So, to have that kind of platform to provide it to someone like yourself, that's what the show is all about. The first thing I wanted to ask you, and I saw in one of the reports I read that your brother's case, at least for a stretch, was one of the only unsolved cold cases in the Green Bay area of Wisconsin. Is that still true?
Yes, that's still the case. Yeah.
Because that's obviously a big city area. So for that big an area, I was a little bit surprised that they didn't have more unsolved cases. Unfortunately, that one that is still unsolved happens to be your brother's case.
Yeah, it's Green Bay is it's a smaller city than most people think. I know we've got the NFL team and everything, but it's a little bit over 100,000 and kind of a down to earth, Midwest town, not a whole lot of violent crime and stuff like that. So yeah, not typically very many murders, and being a smaller town, word kind of gets around about who did what, and yeah, it is unfortunate that Doug's case is still open and all that.
Well, and we're definitely going to touch on some of the details. There's a lot of stuff that's known and stuff that's not known about the case. But before we jump into the details of what happened to him, can you tell us a little bit about him personally and what kind of person he was?
Yeah, Doug was a very, this is going to be so cliche, but he was incredibly unique. Our family kind of describes him as like a supernova, which is, for listeners who don't know, it's like a star that burns extremely hot and extremely bright, and you can see these things, across galaxies, but they don't last very long, and it's kind of this short and spectacular event, and that in a lot of ways was Doug's life. He was a very, very strong personality, and that could land either way depending who he was interacting with, but people generally had very strong feelings toward Doug, whether they really appreciated him or really disliked him. And so he was very polarizing that way. He was a really fun guy, goofy. A lot of people remember his laugh, and he was a very creative person. He had such unique perspectives on things, especially for his age and, just kind of general lack of life experience. He just had, such a unique perspective, and, this ability to quickly change the energy in a room, and again, both for better and for worse. He was very anti-authority. He loved to challenge rules. He loved challenging people in positions of power and, kind of the establishment. So he was a very counterculture guy. Very, very fun, very social, and, just very memorable. Everyone's got a story about Doug, and, those stories usually bring smiles to people's faces when they remember them. So,
and he was a couple years older than you?
Yeah, he was about 2.5 years older than me. So we grew up, pretty close, and we grew up, in a single parent household, just with my mom. Our father was killed when we were both pretty young. Doug was about 5 and I was about 3. And so we had a complex relationship, I guess, being, that he was, in some ways the man of the house, and also my older brother. And so yeah, he was a little bit older and was killed just a couple days prior to his 20th birthday.
Did you look up to him as the older brother? Were there certain cool things about him that you tried to emulate?
Oh yeah, all of it. It was like the classic older younger brother relationship of, I very much wanted to be doing whatever he was doing. Wanted to be involved with him and his friends, and that he and they would frequently find that very annoying. And so, yeah, it was typical in that way that I definitely looked up to him. We were very close and had, we also had a very rivalrous relationship, being so close, in age and everything. So there's just everything that goes along with, that brotherhood relationship of being close, but also, having a lot of friction. And, but certainly I looked up to him, and especially in our younger years, and just really, wanted to, be like Doug and do what Doug was doing.
Yeah. And that sounds like a pretty common, brother relationship where you sort of fight, but also times there's friction, and, at the same time, you still look up to him.
Totally.
So a couple of things in doing the research on this, there weren't a lot of articles out there, which was a little bit surprising considering that it is, still an unsolved case. But the one thing that I have to bring up, because it's mentioned in some of the reports, is that the police believe that your brother was somehow involved in drugs. There were drugs on hand, cash on hand in the home where he was killed. And even if that's the case, that doesn't justify what happened to him. He didn't deserve to be killed. But I just want to know from you personally, from your family's perspective, how important is it that when people hear Doug's name or hear about his case, that they set that stuff aside and look at your brother for what he is, a murder victim?
Well, there's a lot to that question. Doug was absolutely involved with drugs. They were a big part of his lifestyle, a big part of his socializing, and in many ways, I think he was using some of them to self-medicate. In other cases, he was, purely recreating with them. But yeah, no, there's our family's certainly not in denial about that or trying to cover it up or anything. To me, the way that I look at it is, Doug was, he was killed right 2 days prior to his 20th birthday. And he was involved with drugs and using them. And, he sold weed out of his house and, in, large quantities. And this is in Wisconsin. So, they still have no kind of medical or recreational marijuana there. So this is a very illegal setting and context, right? And, young guy kind of running around with lots of cash and weed. So, we certainly acknowledge that. But I guess, the way I think about it is, that was just a slice of Doug's life as a whole. And, in those near 20 years that he was around, drugs were a part of his life at some points, and at others, he wasn't involved with drugs at all. So, to me, obviously, there, and I see him a lot more for a human being, right? Like even being a murder victim is such a small part of who Doug was. But obviously, such a dramatic, tragic conclusion to his life certainly adds this tone and hue, right? Of, when he comes to mind, especially, you look at the news articles and everything, and it is very centered around the drugs and all that stuff. And, to me, again, I look at it as like, he was a young kid, and he was selling weed and having a lot of fun doing it. And, if people want to fault him for that, they're certainly free to pass their judgment. But I guess, to me, that it's just kind of a trivial element of everything that happened. I mean, obviously the fact that he was selling drugs deeply impacted how he died, but At the same time, his life as a whole, there was just so much more to it than the drugs. So
sure, and what you said makes perfect sense, and I think because of what he was openly doing, the life he was leading, the people that he was maybe interacting with, that may have led to, and we're going to get into those details, but that may have led to the bad people that did this to him coming into his life and being there at the end. One thing I just want to clarify, that the place he was living, was this an apartment or was this a home? And was he living out on his own, or did he have roommates?
It was sort of a home split into 2 units. It was kind of like a duplex type thing. And, he rented the place. He had one roommate at the time who was not home during the invasion. And I'm still, in very close contact with that roommate, where, we maintain a very close friendship. And, but yeah, he rented, kind of this duplex and had a roommate, but had a very rich social life.
So a lot of people, friends hanging out, come and go, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And, the kind of thing that would come along with, when you're selling lots of weed out of your place, you've got, lots of young people coming, going, lots of traffic, lots of, word getting passed around. So yeah, he was very kind of interconnected with the younger element of Green Bay.
How long was he living there when he was killed?
At his place, I think he'd been there maybe 1 or 2 years, but he had been in Green Bay since, I think he was probably about 11 or 12 when we moved there.
Okay. So he knew a lot of people, but that particular place that he was living, he had only been there a pretty short time.
Yeah.
Had he ever had any trouble or any run-ins, any threats or anything with anyone in the past since he was living there?
Not really, or at least not, not that I know of. He did live a kind, in my opinion, a kind of sketchy lifestyle, and certainly spent time with lots of sketchy characters. But there was never, like a violent element, there was never any kind of like gangster type stuff going on. Nobody vying for turf or any of that. So no, there were never any kind of known threats made or anything like that.
Okay. If you would, can you walk us through sort of the events as you understand them from March 8th, 2009, the day your brother was killed? Can you sort of, for listeners, just give us an idea of how things unfolded that day?
And feel free to interrupt me as well. I might, be going off on a tangent somewhere. I'll try to keep it focused though. So yeah, he was killed on the 8th, 10th, and this is Green Bay, Wisconsin. So it was a very snowy night. There was a blizzard actually that evening. He was killed. Our family was notified, kind of middle of the night. Police officer, knocked on our door, and I was woken up and everything. And, the first couple days following, those are obviously very critical for any investigation. I think especially homicide, and the police actually failed to contain and control the crime scene for about 2 or 3 days. So, after Doug was killed, there were tons of people coming and going from the home. Moving taking things. It was a very, obviously in retrospect, that can be critical to making or breaking an investigation, right? So, if you've got 2 or 3 days of people actively tinkering with, the scene of a murder, that's going to have a huge impact on the evidence that investigators take away. So that was a major issue with the investigation, and there were many witnesses to the murder as well, who were present in the home at the time, and unfortunately, they ended up lying, in an ongoing basis to the police about what happened, how they were involved. It was a bunch of young people who were very, I think, scared of legal repercussions for themselves and how this was going to affect their lives. And so there was just a lot of people who were just really covering their own asses. And again, these are 19, 18, 20-year-old kids. So hard to find fault, but so in a lot of ways the investigation was not easy for the police, but I also don't have a whole lot of sympathy. There's quite a bit of incompetence demonstrated as well, and they pursued the investigation for some time. It really just culminated in a lot of drug charges. And again, when I say drug, it was all marijuana related. So, I, for example, live in Colorado now, where, weed is treated as a very innocuous substance, generally speaking. And, to imagine sending these 18-year-olds to prison in some cases for years at a time, it was really, in retrospect, these cops just kind of threw on drug charges, patted themselves on the back, handed out promotions, and that was how the investigation kind of went. So no charges were made, no charges have been made. The police, like I said, kind of went in circles doing some interviews, trying to clear up what were lies and what weren't. And, where we're at today is most of the police involved have been, have either retired or gone elsewhere. And so there is a new investigator in charge of the case. He seems relatively motivated, but I've also got some qualms with his approach to things as well. So the investigation anyway, in large part, in my view and my family's view, was seriously bungled. Really not much attention paid to the actual murder at hand. This was more of a flushing, I think, for the police of like, hey, we've just uncovered this huge, marijuana ring type deal. So they, made a bunch of busts, and since that time, again, I was 17 when all this happened. So it was my senior year of high school. I ended up going to University of Colorado the following year. So I got, out of the state, and much more disconnected from those Green Bay social circles now. And, my family has moved around as well. They're only in Wisconsin part-time of the year and all this stuff. So, since that time, it's just been, an unraveling, I guess, of that community, of young people. And it was just really disillusioning to see, a lot of these people who, a lot of the people involved ended up, they wanted full immunity, and then, giving up details on everyone else selling weed, and kind of disappearing to another city, and all this stuff. So it was just really unfortunate. I got to see the really dark, negative sides, I think, of human motivation, and seeing that, the police really weren't that motivated in capturing the murderers, I should say. And the DA was not motivated. Her feelings that she expressed to my mother were that, that this was kind of one less drug dealer, and that the city and society was better off because of it. And so she wasn't highly motivated to find these murderers. And so, it was really just seeing failures of institutional systems the whole way. And then seeing the news kind of failing to capture any of this, which, I thought, wow, this is a story. I mean, it was almost comical how poorly the police and investigators handled everything about the case, and frankly have continued to. So one gets murdered, like, hey, they're going to find, in quotes, the bad guys charged and found guilty and go to prison, and it's going to be that all these systems work. But the reality, for me and my family, unfortunately, was that these systems that are in place to keep our society running as a society that we all want to live in really failed us at every point. And that's still the case, right? I mean, and again, nobody's been charged. Doug is dead, and we're all just trying to keep on living. So,
it sounds,
sure.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, it sounds almost like, in your opinion, there's a double standard, a double type of policing. Like, had this been a well-to-do, high society person that was killed, the police might have taken it more seriously. But since this was a guy that was killed inside a house with drugs and money, it's just one less drug dealer off the streets, and, going about our business.
That seems to be my impression. I guess there's a little bit more nuance to it than that. My stepdad, at the time, was actually considered a very well-to-do person in Green Bay society, connected with the mayor, an entrepreneur and business owner, had built like a skate park for the city, a philanthropist, had really been an asset to the city and state and society in myriad ways. And then, of course, you get the contrast to my brother, who, again, yeah, like you mentioned, is just kind of in the eyes of the state, a degenerate drug dealer. So I think, the connections of my stepdad did offer some unique resources to us, and I think actually got the investigation looked into more than if my stepdad hadn't had those connections. And I guess that's what's still so kind of surprising and alarming, is that even, him being connected the way that he was, that there was still so much incompetence and dragging of feet, and just, really, frankly, lack of humanity.
Offer valid on standard browsers, US only.
When I heard about Date My Age, I thought, really? But there I was in my empty, quiet house, my laptop on the kitchen counter, and I typed in my name. Looking for a man between the ages of 40 to 60? Sure, why not?
Date My Age is different. With verified profiles, you can feel safe and secure to explore meaningful connections with interesting and mature singles.
Date My Age made it really easy. I could join and view online profiles for free. All of a sudden, my empty house wasn't so quiet anymore. I got so much attention, it just made me feel seen and alive. Date My Age helped me start a totally new chapter in my life.
Find a friend, a lover, a partner at Date My Age. Get 60% off when you join at datemyage.com today. That's datemyage.com to connect with thousands of singles worldwide. datemyage.com.
And if we can, let's go back specifically to the night of your brother's murder. So from the reports, it sounds like he was hanging out there. There were friends there. There were acquaintances there. There were witnesses there. And all of a sudden, two men who were described as black men wearing masks barge in, and they're waving guns, telling everybody to cooperate. What happened, according to what is known, during that incident?
Yeah, so I'll give you my understanding, which, again, since I wasn't there, I have not heard myself even firsthand reports. None of the people involved wanted to talk to me after all this unfolded. So I'm going off what I've been told by police and others who heard the firsthand reports. So some of this might be incorrect, but my impression of everything that happened is exactly like you described, that Doug had some people over, and these were likely, people who were buying weed. So he would buy, weed in bulk and then kind of split it up and send everyone on their way. I believe that's, what was going to happen or what was happening. And then, my impression is that these two, like you said, black men with masks who were both, either both or one of them armed, came in, demanded, drugs and money, or one or the other, and that, everyone cooperate. I'm not sure, if they ordered people to the ground or hands up or whatever. That's my impression. And I had actually spoken with Doug about this in the past, about, I knew that he was involved with some dangerous situations and sketchy people. And we had talked about it some, just kind of brother to brother. And he had mentioned that his opinion was that nobody he knew was gutsy enough to pull the trigger. And so he was willing to fight with anybody who might ever pull a gun on him or whatever. And I told him that I thought that was really dumb. And, he took my free advice and, thought it was worth what he paid for it, and just ignored it. Right. So that's what he did. He got up and fought with these guys who just came into his home, and, his girlfriend was there and everything. So you have to imagine, as a man, if you're at home with your significant other and some armed guys come in, are you going to let them have their way, or are you going to put up some resistance? Everyone has a different answer to that, but I think it's more easy to empathize maybe with, what might have been going through Doug's head. But in any case, he got up and started to fight with one or both of these guys. And he had been in lots of fights before. I think he almost kind of liked it. And anyway, he fought with these guys and, was shot. And after he was shot, I believe there was kind of pandemonium that unfolded. I'm not clear on all the details, but I do know that, it wasn't like he was shot and immediately died. He was shot and then laid there bleeding out while all these people scrambled to get out and basically not be connected with what was obviously, becoming was now a crime scene and all this. So
almost like they just wanted to escape and not be there when the police showed up.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, nobody wanted to be there when the police showed up. These were all people who were buying, quarter pounds, half pounds of weed and going home and then selling it in smaller amounts. Doug was just the guy who'd buy a couple pounds and then split it into these smaller amounts. Right. So these were all people involved with drug dealing as well. And like you said, absolutely did not want to be around when the cops came. They did not want to be connected to this event. And so my impression is, that Doug basically laid there. There may have been an opportunity to save his life, if someone had called 911 right away, but they didn't. They all, like I said, kind of cleaned up the best they could. People left. And so being a blizzard, there would have been very clear tire tracks to follow and all this, but all of that was, scrambled around and damaged with so many people kind of proceeding afterward. And so anyway, there was, a lot of less than admirable character that was shown after that. I believe his girlfriend ran upstairs to the bathroom, locked herself in the bathroom, and was just hysterical. And like I said, other people were kind of scrambling, trying to either get rid of drugs or get rid of money or get out of there. And that's really all I know. I can't, I don't know even what the murderers or robbers did at that point. I don't know if they took things and got out. I don't know if they just ran in panic. I don't know if they, shot him and then kind of controlled the situation to get all the money and drugs. I really have no idea.
Wow. Sounds like a real, just a chaos all around.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. Yeah, it's an accurate depiction.
Now, so I would think, and I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like someone might talk along the way and say, well, I heard it was so-and-so, or so-and-so was bragging about this. Was there any of that? Was there any discussion or any rumors that made their way around about who might have killed your brother?
Yeah, there were certainly rumors, some of which, I kind of bought into, and some of which I didn't. And, where I've settled out after all these years, I'm very confident, actually, about who did this or who might have been involved. And, that's related to some of these rumors for sure. And that's largely what the police were kind of hoping for, was that, someone was going to come out and talk or like you said, kind of brag about this or mention, that they might have been involved some way. But, that hasn't happened yet. And yeah, so I don't, me and my family are not really holding our breath, but
it's got to be tough, though, to know that this person who may be the person or the people that are responsible, and here they are, not being arrested, not being charged in the case.
Yeah, it's very tough, especially given, there's a bit more context to it that, these were not random people on the street that were just breaking into a home. These were people that, I actually considered, in particular, one of them a very close friend of mine at one point. We spent a lot of time together hanging out. I introduced this person to Doug, so there's certainly an aspect of guilt there for me, and certainly aspects of guilt related to, how naive I was to be associating, hanging out with these people, and thinking that that there was no way that they would have put me and my brother's interests so far below their own that they'd be willing to take a life. It's very tough, to have memories of, there were likely 2 or 3 people involved, and growing up in Green Bay, like I said, it's actually a pretty small for a city, and so I was playing football with these guys when we were young. I was shared classrooms with them growing up, and to think that and strangely, Mike, after Doug's death, one of these guys in particular was so much nicer to me than he ever had been, growing up. And I hate to say it took me years to put it together. I thought he just felt bad or something, but after years and years of reflection and trying to put the pieces together, it clicked for me that, I think that this person felt bad for me because this, I don't think they personally had an intention of, killing or doing any actual violence. I think that they just wanted the robbery to go smoothly and get away with some drugs or money. And to be honest, I kind of feel like maybe this person at that time was in over their head and felt just really remorseful about what they did. And I mean, obviously this is me all speculating. I can't know this person's motivations, but it's tough to think about all this, to think that, I was still interacting with these people after they, likely killed my brother, and that I might have played a role in introducing them and getting my brother killed and all that. There's a lot of layers, and yeah, I've spent a lot of time and resources, to come to terms, with all that and with my role, in all this,
Yeah, it's a lot to try and balance all of that, and the fact that the person may be connected to you, may have, you may have been friends with them, as you mentioned. Have obviously we can't name names here, but have these people, as far as been talked to by police? Have they been cooperative? Have you ever confronted them yourself?
They have talked to police. Police have talked to them. By the time I kind of put all this together, Mike, this was, I was maybe, I don't know, I would guess ballpark 23 years old when I think I figured out who, were the main people involved. So that was, maybe 6 years after Doug's death. And so I'd been in Colorado that whole time and, wasn't really in touch with them. But it, I do think about confronting them, if I knew, if I still had, one of their phone numbers or something, I actually really would like to speak with them. And, I've really let go of a lot of my anger, I think, and ill will toward these people, by this point. But at the same time, I would actually prefer to be able to talk to them about this and get some insight into where their head was at and what they were motivated by and what they were thinking and all that. Even if they were never charged with anything, even if they were granted full immunity, I would really like to just sit down and be able to hear their thoughts. And, because I'm curious, I want to know, are these guys sociopaths? Do they not care at all? Or does this haunt them? Is this is this a regret of their life? Or is it neither of those? Is it somewhere in the middle where this is just, this was just one chapter of their life event that they kind of look back on and, think like that we all have chapters of our lives, right? And
Yeah.
So I really wonder about them and their persons, and I would love to be able to, like you said, kind of confront them and talk to them about all this. I think it'd be would offer some resolution. But by the time that I kind of figured this out, I was no longer connected with these people. And to be totally frank, I don't really know where to begin, if I wanted to get a hold of them or something either. So.
Sure. And it was clear to me from your initial contact with me that you had a lot of concerns, misgivings. You felt that the full story wasn't told, and I'm just going to read part of an email that you sent me. And just I'd like you to address some of your concerns that you mentioned. But you wrote, "My mother's side of the story has never been told, nor has mine. Doug's best friend at the time has never had his side of the story told. The truth of his murder involves police corruption, deceit, and lying of witnesses, betrayal of myself and my brother by his killers, and virtually every other negative side of humanity that one could imagine. It's a dark story that has never been told by media, and local news has Disney-fied the story to serve their and Green Bay police agendas." So that's obviously a lot of feelings there, and a lot of concerns and misgivings that you seem to have and all of that. Can you maybe break down and talk about some of those concerns that are still bothering you right now today, all these years later?
Yeah. I mean, we definitely touched on a lot of it already. I would say, first place to start was, of course, the Green Bay police. The fact that they, like I said, failed to control or even attempt to control. There was no crime scene tape or any of this stuff for several days following a home invasion, gunpoint murder. The incompetence is just really kind of staggering. As well as the investigation, in my view, the fact that they were so focused on busting these, in quotes, drug dealers who were, again, young kids that were dealing with weed. I mean, whether they're good or bad people is a whole other question. But, I think the police priority to make the weed busts over the murder was, just absurd and ridiculous. I think that the DA and her approach to the case was pretty shameful. She made a point of talking to my mom, and I think the way that she approached it, she came to my mom at one of these press meetings, and it was literally out of the blue. She said, he suffered, right? And my mom was obviously taken aback, and the DA, proceeded to share all the details of, how he was shot and basically laid on the floor, bleeding out while everybody panicked around him. And, to be totally honest, I would prefer to know that truth rather than, think that he was shot, died instantly, and that everything was fine, so to speak. I think I would prefer to know that, but at the same time, it was that news was given to my mother with what was very clearly a cold heart, and the DA just had a very contentious rapport, I guess, with my family through this ordeal. And it actually wasn't clear if I was going to be charged with anything or not, because I would hang out at the house relatively frequently. I enjoyed smoking weed as an adolescent and all that, and it was a way to bond with my brother. So I went over there and they wanted to charge me with, some weed related stuff. And, going back to, I think it was my stepdad's connections, frankly, that I wasn't charged with anything. So, again, I'm going a little bit on a tangent, Mike, but it was, this gross negligence and incompetence of the Green Bay Police and Drug Task Force. It was really shamefully motivated, the lack of effort by the DA and, whatever personal issues that she has with cannabis and weed. And then, to go beyond, we already touched as well on everyone present at the murder, all these witnesses, they could have called 911 when Doug was shot and they didn't. So, who knows? Doug literally might still be alive today, had they done that, but they didn't. Doug's killers may have been charged if everyone told the truth after the murder of what happened, who went where, all that stuff. But they didn't. And so, I find fault with, again, the police. I find fault with the DA. I find fault with the witnesses. And then, I touched on it already that I share some guilt in this of having been so naive as to, make friends, in quotes, with who the suspected killers are and to introduce them to my brother. I feel that I certainly played a role and have guilt there. And in many ways have spent, the last minimum 5 years, but realistically, probably closer to the last decade, trying to purge myself of this naivete and, to become a much wiser, worldly, competent human being in the world and able to discern, dangerous situations and dangerous people from safe ones. And so certainly I find fault with, my younger self, and I find a lot of fault with certainly the people involved in the murder, because if they are who I think they are, they befriended me with nothing but ill intentions. And, this was a very long, calculated, plotted out, event or effort by these people that, this was not like they said, hey, this guy's selling weed, let's rob him tomorrow. This was we know this guy's selling weed, let's get as much information as possible from his younger brother, who is so naive and forthcoming and willing to connect us and all that. I definitely find fault with what I can only characterize as malevolence. I don't know how else to look at that other than betrayal, malevolence, and just, evil incarnate in this world. I don't personally believe in good or bad people. I think I really resonate with Alexander Solzhenitsyn's quote on that good and the line between good and evil runs through the middle of every human heart. And I think that, we all have good and evil inside of us, and we all do good and evil things. But to, that level of calculated evil, you need to answer to that. Someone needs to answer for that, or really should, for the world that I want to live in. And, I don't have kids, but if I did, I would want them to live in a more just world. So yeah, the main people I find fault with there, Mike, to unwrap that paragraph would be, the police, all the law enforcement agencies involved, the prosecuting attorney in her office, the witnesses, myself, the killers, and the news, for really the only story they've told really is, this poor family, they've lost, this young kid who was by the way, involved with the drugs, and isn't this sad that they've never found the killers? And, they've never covered any aspect of the police's incredible mismanagement, or, the DA's eye-popping attitude, or, any of it really. So yeah, find fault with just about everyone along the way, and again, myself included. And so yeah, I guess a part of me just really wanted to be able to share all this and get it out there, because I feel like all this information is just kind of getting banged around my head and my family's heads, and without much outlet. And I just don't think that that's right, that that Doug's death is and has been portrayed without all the nuance and complex truth.
Well, it's clear that this is still something that's weighing on you. It's something that you want to know who did this to your brother and have them held accountable. Are there any websites, social media, any places that people can leave tips if they want to leave something anonymously, to say, hey, I heard this or that and I don't want to be involved, but here's a name, anything like that could help in your brother's case?
There is, I think it's like Crime Stoppers. There's a Green Bay, Wisconsin anonymous tip line that people can leave information. And, to my knowledge as well, my stepdad put a reward out for any information that would lead to the arrest of the killers. And to my knowledge, it's all still standing. And I think it's about $10,000 or something like that for any information that would lead to those arrests. Yeah. If anyone could contact, Green Bay, Wisconsin Police Department, they have anonymous tip lines and stuff like that.
Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the notes. And, just anyone out there listening, if you don't want to get involved, I can almost see someone, from their perspective, hey, these people killed someone in cold blood before, I'm afraid to come forward. What protection do I have? Just send an anonymous note or something that, you can give your information but not be linked back to you, and help your family in the process here get some justice after 13 years.
Yeah, I won't have high hopes, but I do appreciate making people aware of that and keeping that open. Well,
I appreciate coming on, James, to talk about Doug's case, and I hope for your family's sake somehow that despite the passage of time that you do find out who did this and they can be held accountable.
Well, I really appreciate it, Mike, and just want to reiterate, I really appreciate you holding this platform and granting people like me an opportunity to speak, my perspective and to get it out there. And this is really, I guess, kind of exactly what I had in mind when I contacted you, of just wanting to get, our side of the story and what I see and believe as truth, that has not been put out there, so I really appreciate you, making all the efforts to host this podcast and to be able to offer that to people like me. So
no, it's my pleasure to have a platform for you to be able to tell your side of the story. So thank you. Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. I'd like to thank Sonny Landon for writing and research assistance in this episode. As we wrap up this episode, I want to play for you a preview of one of my other shows, Missing Persons, which I co-host along with my friend Jess Betancourt. We cover a lot of perplexing cases, and as a listener of The Murder of My Family, I think you'll appreciate the format. If you already listen to Missing Persons, thanks for your support, but if you're not familiar with it, I hope this preview will give you an idea of what you'll hear on the show. We'll be back here soon with an all-new episode of The Murder of My Family, and I hope you'll join me for it. But before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody. It's estimated that at any given time, there are up to 90,000 missing persons, and that's just in the United States. Imagine if your loved one went missing. Is there anything that you wouldn't do to try and find them? This is Missing Persons, and I'm your co-host, Mike Morford. In every episode of Missing Persons, you'll hear about a person who disappeared and currently remains missing, as well as the efforts to find them. In some cases, there are clues to follow and leads to check on. In other cases, it's as if the person just vanished off the face of the earth. In each episode, you'll hear from someone that's desperately searching for that missing person. And whether they've been looking for 30 days or 30 years, the struggle to find answers is real. Will you join us and become part of the search for answers in these cases? If so, search for and subscribe to Missing Persons wherever you listen to podcasts. There are dozens of episodes available to binge on right now, and new episodes come out every other Saturday.